Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Charlene Li. This is a LinkedIn Live show that poses questions to thought leaders and doers like Charlene, who are working hard to make our world better. Grace Under Pressure focuses on the things which are too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the connecting, and commitment we show toward others. And grace for me is generosity, respect, compassion. And when you do these things as a leader, it means you work to pull people together and you mobilize the organization for greater good. Welcome, Charlene.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, I want to tell everybody about you. For the past couple of decades, Charlene Li has been helping people see the future, which is fascinating. And she's an expert on digital transformation, leadership, customer experience, and the future of work. And boy, do we need that now. So Charlene is the author of 6 books, including the New York Times bestseller, Open Leadership. She's the co-author of the critically acclaimed book Groundswell, which is where I first encountered her. And her latest book, which we're going to talk about today, is The Disruption Mindset. She's a founder and senior fellow at Altimeter, which was acquired in 2015 by Profit. She's one of the most creative people in the business, and I just discovered she was trained as a classical pianist. So I am in awe of her, because those of you who follow this show know that I'm a pianist, but I'm not classical, and I'm maybe even an amateur. Anyway, welcome, Charlene.
Thank you. Looking forward to this.
Okay, great. We're in disruptive times. So times are made for you, right? What's most surprising to you and the ripple effects that you've seen?
What's most surprising is how well we've weathered this storm over the past year. I mean, when it all began, it just looked like everything was just going to just fall off the edge of the cliff. And what we did is we went up right to the edge and we looked over the side and was like, we're not going down there. We're going to stay right here and we're going to make it work. Okay. And so I am blown away by the resilience and the grit that we all have to get up in the morning every day and go out and deal with this. We're not taking this lying down. And I think that has given us so much more strength to say we can weather other disruptions in our lives too.
It's a valid point, and I liked how you mentioned resilience, because that's been a theme of most everyone I've spoken to. And how do you just define resilience? I have a description, but I'd like to hear yours.
Oh, that's a great question. I think resilience is knowing that you've just had a setback. You choose to look at what do you learn from this, rather than let it really push you all the way back, and you then get up and even more determined to say, I will learn from that, build on that, and continue to go forward. Oh, there's something in you that helps you get back when you've been punched down.
I always just thought of it as the bending but not breaking, but coming back up. But Eileen McDarg has a philosophy that it's a bouncing forward too, because the world we come back to, and that's certainly where we are now, is different. So
yeah, and it continues to be. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a time where things weren't changing. They just maybe weren't changing at the scale that they are today. But I would actually argue that the world has been changing at this rapid pace. It was a question of whether we're awake and aware of it.
That's an interesting pace. So we'll get into this. What does it mean to lead disruptively? Because when I hear that, I'm going, wait a minute. Doesn't that sound a little counterintuitive, leadership and disruption? So tell me what's going on here.
Right. I think of disruption it's always been thinking about it backwards. We think about it as something to avoid, or we think about it as a technology that's going to create growth. But it's not disruption that creates growth. Instead, it's growth that creates disruption. When we're growing, we're actually creating a huge amount of change. And one or two things happen. You're like, wow, this is a lot of growth. It's worth it. We're just going to hang on by our fingertips and just try to weather it through it. And we'll deal with this disruption. Or we come up against that change and we go, whoa, that's way too much. That is just too much change. I'm going to back away from that.
I'm going to ask you this, and it's just because it's something you said. When we grow quickly, there is disruption. So is that an eye opener for startups because they're born out of disruption, and are they prepared for the next disruption? So,
Well, they're not necessarily born out of disruption. They're born out of nothing. They have nothing to disrupt. They have nothing to lose.
yeah,
So when you have nothing to lose and everything to gain, you're going to try a lot of different things because there's
sure.
no pain in it.
Yeah.
But when you're an incumbent, you have a status quo, you have existing customers, you have profits, you have a customer base. You feel like you're putting them at risk if you don't know what the answer is. So you're going to be more conservative, more cautious about moving forward because you are putting things at risk.
Right.
So growth means not staying where you are, but looking for these new opportunities. And those new opportunities can be really scary.
And actually, I always think of something back to, I haven't mentioned him on this show, but the old Ray Kroc of McDonald's, who Ray was an inventor at Quipster, and he said, if you don't, what is it? If you don't ripen, you rot. So in other words, he was always talking about embracing change and things like that. So really, I mean, he's built his business 60, 70 years ago. So,
right. And one thing that's interesting is we think of ourselves as leaders. Our job is to get rid of chaos, to make things work, right? To get rid of the exceptions. Mm-hmm. Six Sigma is like the epitome of great leadership. I actually think of that as management. And that's great. I mean, it's a really important part of being a leader. But you're a leader when you create change because you're inspiring people to follow you to create that change. Because otherwise, just everybody do the same job, right?
I'm glad you made that distinction because Six Sigma is a management system. And what I always find something, and I don't want to get too far off this, but because I lived through all this with the auto companies going through their relentless pursuing of quality, which they were so far behind the Asian manufacturers, particularly in Japan. Toyota just never embraced Six Sigma because they built it into the system. So that was the great story. Anyway, getting back to your work, talk about it. You have a concept called disruptive transformation. Tell us about that. And you start off with, it's not just innovation.
Right. It's not just innovation because when you think about innovation, you want it tied up with a pretty bow, delivered on a silver platter. Like, look at this great little innovation. We just do this, push this button, and things will be awesome. It never works that way. and so I think that's, innovation is a false promise. And we're much better off being honest about this and saying, this idea, it's going to be great, but it's going to be really hard. It's going to be disruptive. We're going to feel awful in so many ways, but it's going to be worth it. Okay. I also think it's not just about technology. I mean, I have so many examples of companies where it's not about some breakthrough technology. Take Uber. What technology do they have? A mobile phone with location on it. Yeah. That's it. But it was putting a particular problem together with this existing technology in new ways that enabled them to be really successful. And it's also not just as for startups, as we discussed before. Startups may be able to do more, but think about what an incumbent company has. They have brand, customers, people, cash. The only thing that's holding them back is that they have existing customers that they put at risk.
Well, they have
every advantage in the world, right?
Well, materially, yes, but not, I would say maybe psychically not, or culturally, because as you had said, when one had, I mean, on the positive side, we take care of our customers. Delightful, okay? But on the other hand, are we going to destroy our customers? So that's a thought. So elaborate on that, please.
Yes, I think that many existing companies, what happens, and this is true even of startups, the minute you get your first customer, you're going to get blinded by how beautiful and profitable your current customer is. And it's really hard then to see your future customers with that blinding light, this beautiful, bright, shiny light of your customers. Like, why would you ever turn your eye away from them? So I think of them as you have to have almost disruptive sunglasses to be able to look past that beautiful light of your customers, to look around them and see what else is out there. Right. Because I guarantee you, those future customers, they're not very pretty. They're pretty ugly, they're unprofitable. they're paying to serve. Like, why would I even want to go there?
Well, you're hearkening me back to an old saying of Henry Ford, who was saying, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And that would be true of, the first mobile phones. I'd want, who thought of a faster phone or whatever it was? I mean, a wireless, that's, we knew what a walkie-talkie was, but really? So we can't conceive of that. So. And that's
I just think about when we were younger, before pre-internet days. And if we were to show people what our lives look like now, it would be unbelievable. And this is just within the past 25 years or so.
If you want to go back there, Charlene, all you have to do is watch Seinfeld, because how many episodes revolved around a telephone? Making a phone call or a phone number or a pay phone or whatever it was. It'll be all gone with a cell phone. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's funny, but you're right, and so our kids' generation is what?
There was a world before.
Yeah.
How did you survive? What did you do with yourself all day?
When my daughter was young, she's now in her early 30s, she did an oral history with my mother about Pearl Harbor and how she found the news. And my mother happened to be in a movie theater when the news came out, and they had asked all the local sailors to report to their station. And my daughter was saying, well, didn't you just, check your cell or something? So it was, it's kind of funny, so whatever. But are we not still in that? If we envision the future, we don't know what it is. We're still in that. We think, well, why didn't somebody think of it before?
Right. And again, I think this is where I am so excited about what the future can bring. If we can think it, we can actually make it. The question is, do we have that curiosity? Do we have the creativity to think out of the box and beyond just the problem that's in front of us? And I do believe it takes a holistic view and a holistic team. It's not just centered on one person. And this is why I'm such a big believer in diversity and inclusion and belonging, these efforts. It's not about numbers. It's not about something that you should do. It's something that I can actually make you better as a person and as an organization when you have diversity of thought and background.
Without question. And so you break it down into disruptive transformation. There are 3 elements. The first one is your strategy for your future customers. Explain that, please.
Sure. Again, one of the biggest problems with disruption is, like, why are we doing this? How do we stay focused on it? We can think about a strategy, but if that strategy isn't focused on something very concrete, people lose sight of it and they go back to doing the things they have every day. My research found that the one thing that disruptive organizations do really well, and the only thing they need to do to be clear about the strategy, is to clearly define who that future customer is, and then make sure that everyone knows who that is. I can walk around an organization, and this is what I do when I begin my consulting engagements. I spend an hour just walking around. I ask people, who's your future customer? Just random people, like, tell me who your future customer is. They can't. Well, what's your strategy then? Because if it's not centered on reaching that future customer, what is your strategy focused on?
Right.
And then what's your dashboard look like that tells you whether you're meeting that strategy or not?
That's a powerful question. And if you asked me who my future customer is, I would say a faster horse. So that's where my brain is. So how do you help people envision a future customer?
Well, I'll introduce you to my future customer. This is Renee. And I have a picture of her. I know who she is. I know what her pain points are. I know why I'm serving her, what she needs. I know what she feels, thinks, says, and does, and how I could potentially help her and serve her. And so that, I think, and it's an emerging need, right? She's not my current customer today, but I think there's a real reason to be serving her. So I'm disrupting myself and everything that I'm doing, pivoting to make sure that every morning when I wake up, I'm thinking about Renee.
Oh, that's cool.
So that's what you have to do, I think. You have to be really clear about this and then consistently over again and again, convey this is why we are here. We begin every day thinking about your equivalent of a Renee.
Charlene, excuse me, your signal was breaking up a little bit, so you're back now. Okay, so thinking every day. What's a good example of a company that does this well, that envisions its future customers?
Well, you can talk about Amazon, Google and all those folks, but my favorite is Southern New Hampshire University. You get a small private institution, nonprofit in Southern New Hampshire, 3,000 campus students, and then 150,000 or so online students. They're the largest grantor of university degrees from an accredited university in the world. And they will clear about $1 billion in revenues this year.
Wow.
Who would have thought? Like, who gave permission to this tiny little university in the middle of nowhere, the permission to be the largest online college degree institution? And they started 20 years ago. Paul LeBlanc, the president, said, hey, our students who are non-traditional four-year students are not 18 years old. They tend to be mid-career, coming back from the military, stay-at-home moms wanting to begin a nursing career. All sorts of different backgrounds. How can we best serve them? And he had a really clear picture of who their customer was, these future students, and everything revolved around the students. To this day, they have a huge call center that is focused on working with students. Every student has an advisor, and they're constantly thinking about that. Everything they do around their culture, their strategy is focused on this future customer. How do we better serve them? And they were so well prepared to deal with the pandemic when everything had to go virtual, because they were virtual anyways. Yeah. So how do we grow this? How do we support more schools? How do we share our platform with more universities? And just so well positioned to be thinking about how education is going to be delivered in the future.
That's great. So that's a great example. And, it's interesting. You mentioned Amazon and whomever. I don't know that I would actually think of them as innovators. I'm not being facetious. They just seem to evolve. So, they just offer another service online. To me, doesn't strike me as innovative. So,
well, I'll give an example of how Amazon, they just sell more products and everything, but Amazon Web Services was truly game changing. Prime was a game changer in that way. And so there are these innovations, and they all came about from the same exact process. This is the most counterintuitive thing I found, is that these disruptive organizations that continually innovate and try new things and start new things and reinvent themselves, they are really well organized. They have a lot of structure and process. They have a lot of rituals and stories that keep things aligned around this future customer. Amazon in particular has a 1-page press release from the future and a 6-page FAQ that goes along with it. And that is their methodology for vetting new ideas. And the whole thing is based on the future. Like, what would this look like? What impact will it have? How are we going to deliver it? How is it going to work? Yeah. And everything from AWS to Prime to the smallest innovation goes through the exact same process.
Well, thank you for educating me, because this is, of course, I do know Prime. I'm a Prime customer, so and I watch Prime Video. So, but of course, the AWS as well. So I like that idea of you mentioned the word ritual. How does that fit into this concept, Charlene?
Well, rituals, I think about cultures, right? And cultures are made up of how you do things, and in particular, what I call lore, Lore. This is the stuff that is the mushy stuff that makes a culture. And it's frankly just beliefs and behavior. And rituals are such a stepping stone for that.
I want to take you off video for just a second, because your audio is clear, but your video is out. So
it's messy. This is what happens from students in class upstairs.
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry about that.
No, it's not you. Can you hear me? So, okay. Brought you back. Okay.
All right. And so the power of rituals is that they give these foundational and expected ways to mark the passing of time and of achievements, of the comings and goings. And they remind you of why we are here, gathered here together. So the ritual of a religious ceremony, the ritual of orientations and of rituals of graduation, of
Mhm.
recognitions,
Mhm.
they bring comfort to us because they're a constantness in the face of change. And what I find with disruptive organizations, they have a lot more of these processes and rituals and stories because you need that firm foundation because everything that you're doing is totally crazy up here. So you need that stability, that constantness, that we are united, that our relationships are strong, that we know how we're going to work together as we embark on doing these crazy things.
That's a powerful concept because when I think of ritual or an extension in a faith would be liturgy. And any organization can have these repeated things. And I like how I would never have linked the concept of innovation, which is something creating something new, to something which is timeless and binds us together. So thank you for that lesson. So.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. When you're trying to disrupt the world, you need your world to be, your world that you are in, to be constant and stable. Because otherwise, you would take so much energy to try to create that constantness and that stability. You're going to use your energy there versus outside to find those innovations to serve those customers. So when things are ordered in your life, that's when you can go out there and feel safe and secure enough to go do the crazy things. I won't go out to the edge if I think my safety and security is at risk. I
Right.
won't go out there and take a risk if I think it's going to jeopardize my job.
Okay.
So this is the foundational, this is why we get disruption wrong so often. We're not focusing on that stable core.
It sounds so commonsensical that I guess we forget about it. It's interesting. You're bringing me back to these stories. I did some marketing communication ages ago with Apple, and it was the launch of Lisa, which was the precursor, of, as you would know, to Mac. And I found those folks crazy, disruptive, and chaotic and stuff. That was a long time ago. But I like the idea of the stability, then we can be creative. So a fascinating concept. So.
Yeah. But if you look at Apple, again, it was a little bit of a different organization than as
Oh, yeah.
today. They are still incredibly innovative and disruptive. But the way that the company is run with the full functional leadership that they don't have business units, they only have functions. HBR recently had a whole article just explaining how they work.
Mhm.
And it's a very different organization than most companies. It is 100% functional. And so the functions all have their areas of expertise and they pull together teams to execute on the products or the services, but then they are aligned organizationally around those functions. So very strong expertise that they come from.
Charlene, do you ever get called in by companies, say, you don't need to name them, but an established company that says, Charlene, help us be innovative?
Yes, I do. I do a lot of work around that, as you can imagine. Especially now, I wrote a book around disruption right before one of the biggest disruptions. I mean, this is just luck or bad luck, whichever way you look at it.
There's a lot of, but it's. So what's the first couple of things you say? I mean, do you walk through this, the strategy and movement and culture? Or how do you begin?
It depends on where that starting point is. Sometimes they really don't know what their strategy is, what it should be, or they have a couple competing visions of what it could be.
Mm-hmm.
And so we really go back to the basics. And I totally go back to like, who are you trying to serve? What are the customer pain points you're trying to achieve? And no matter how crazy the idea is, the crazier the idea, put it on the table. Because if that can give you an idea of who that customer is, and maybe a step closer than that crazy idea that you can do in the meantime until the technology, your business, or the customers eventually evolve to that. But that gives us a strategy. But more often than not, it's the culture that's a mess. They know what they need to do, but they have no confidence that their culture can get them there.
Well, one of the things, tell us about fear factor in culture. That's an inhibitor? Do you encounter that?
Absolutely. When I ask people, what are the beliefs that are holding your organization back from being more disruptive? We have to be perfect. I'm afraid that if we make a single mistake, it'll never be accepted. We can't take risks. or I don't have permission. The most insidious thing is I have great ideas, but I don't have permission to act. And then what I do is we gather the top leadership. It could be the 20 people or the 300 people in the organization. Like, this is the leadership all in one room. And people say, I don't have permission to act. I'm like, well, do we have everyone here in this room? Is there anybody saying you do not have permission to act? Can we reaffirm with each other that you have permission to act? Is there anybody who still believes truly don't believe they have permission to act? And it's not going to be solved in that room that day. There are things that we do and say constantly that give people the impression that they don't have permission to act. So you need to root out those behaviors to match the belief that everybody has agency and the ability to be innovative and disruptive.
That's such a powerful concept, but I can just see people. I can mentally image you pulling together the top people and then saying, we have permission, and no one's going to speak up, but then they'll go, wait a minute, when they walk out. So you got your work cut out for you. So, you talk about leadership in disruption. If it's going to work, it must have a movement. How do you define that?
Well, again, if you're talking about disruption, it's usually the bigger the disruption, the bigger the change, the more difficult it's going to be. And so if you want to get people aligned around this new area, you have to constantly inspire them. And you need to create a movement where you're encouraging other leaders to step up into your place in some cases, to become leaders themselves, to continue the movement. It has to be such a strong sense of feeling that it gains a life of its own. It's moving on its own towards that goal. Sure. And so we are not taught as leaders to create movements. I mean, we're actually told to kind of look away from movements. We don't want movements. We want to squash them because they can be chaotic and can get out of control.
Sure.
If we know how to start and to sustain movements, that is a key part of being a disruptive leader.
That's great. You have 3 concepts about disruptive organization. The first is openness. Is that the cultural aspect?
Yeah, all of these are 3 beliefs that I found across organizations. I would ask them, like, what's in your water, right? What is it that you drink? What is it that you breathe that allows you to be disruptive? And these beliefs are things that are ingrained in the way they work. And these beliefs are openness. The second one is agency, and the third is a bias for action. And believe me, I did a lot of mind mapping to figure out, like, what is it? How do they relate to each other? But openness is probably the most interesting one, because it just says, hey, the more information you can have flow, the more transparent you are about how decisions are made. And it's all about creating trust and, very importantly, accountability. You don't get permission to blow up things and then just walk away from it. You've got to make it work, right? This is not disruption for the sake of blowing things up. This is disrupting the status quo into something better.
Well, the flip side of that, and I understand exactly what you're saying, but it's in you don't get permission to blow things up, sure, but isn't there permission to fail? So
absolutely. But that's different than wantonly blowing things up. One of the concepts I have is defining the playing field. You know, when we're in soccer or playing tennis, we know what the lines are. We know what the rules are, so we can play a really good, intense game. Your job as a leader, in terms of that openness, is to define what is open. It's not throwing the doors open completely. It's about defining, what are we going to do? What are we not going to do? Because it's so much easier just to shut the door and say, do nothing. It's easy to be closed.
Yeah.
When you're open, you have to work really hard at it.
Right.
You have to define what open means. What will we be transparent about? That takes a lot of work.
And you have something called the bias for action. Is that the impetus for change, or how do you do it?
The bias for action means that you have this future customer here and you're so in love with them, you're going to run as fast as you can towards them because you love them, you want to be with them. And so are you going to sit here and wait until you have the perfect solution before you go after them? No, you're going to like, hey, I put it together, kind of holds together. I want to show it to you. What do you think? Yeah. Oh, you don't like this? Let me go back and fix it again. It's more than just being agile, though. It is to say that we are going to act on behalf of our future customers as fast as we can. I think of this concept of minimally viable data versus minimally viable product. What is the one question, one piece of data I need to have in order to take that next step? Not the full solution, but just give me what's the most important thing I need to get to go after that. Instead, what we ask of people is like, give me the perfect solution and be 100% sure that it's right, then come to me. That takes too long.
Yeah, I'm glad you related to that, because when we think innovation, too often it's with the big I. It means the next iPod or the next big device or Uber or whatever. But so much of innovation is incremental. And I think what you said is one step at a time. Did I interpret that correctly, Charlene?
Yes, it's not just one step at a time, but constantly taking small steps. What I found with these disruptive organizations, again, these big leaps that look like big leaps that happen every once in a while, they're actually taking small leaps constantly and iterating constantly to get to that big leap.
Right.
I talked to one organization who says, oh yeah, we've been very disruptive, but the last time we did it, it was so hard. It took everything out of us and we're still recovering. I said, how long ago was that? 2 years ago. I went, if your innovation cycles of every 2 years, your customers are going to be moving far ahead of you before you can begin again.
Right.
So, and yeah, the one thing I think is very interesting is oftentimes our speed of innovation is dictated by the availability of our calendars. So when can you get together again to next talk about this? Oh, let's see, next opening is 2 weeks versus saying, how long does it actually take us to do the work to figure out how the next step will be? It's probably 2 hours.
Yeah,
right.
That's a great. Yeah, I don't really have innovation's important, but I don't really have time for that right now. That's a great one, Charlene. Anyway, Charlene, time is flying by. I could go on and on, but our show's coming to an end. I always invite our guests to share a story of grace, and I know you have one, so I'd like you to share it with us, please. So.
Yes, as a founder, entrepreneur, and CEO, there have been so many times I have screwed up. And I am so grateful for the grace that my team gives me. And it is born of this trust in the relationship that I could completely screw up and be forgiven. And that allows me to move forward confident, knowing that I have that relationship with them and that I live with such grace. That allows me to do some crazy things with all the best intention. So that is the grace in my life that I'm just the most grateful for, that the people in my life and especially my team allow me to live with that grace on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, that's a lovely story.
It gives me great peace of mind.
Oh, that's great. They're supporting you, and I'm sure because you've earned it, so it's mutual. Charlene, how can people find you?
You can find me at my website, charleneli.com, and I'm very active on LinkedIn, so please follow me, connect with me there, and look forward to connecting with you.
Great. Thank you, Charlene. And with that, we'll close out. So